This video is a part of a series I'm working on about Final Fantasy VII, and just a bunch of short videos about it, and it's a compilation. So if you haven't seen my massive video from earlier this year entitled The Plan of Sephiroth, I'd recommend you do, as that video explores some ideas that I'll bring up in this, and in future FF7 videos on this channel. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, or any other videos on my channel, please consider subscribing. It means a lot to a small creator like myself. Thank you, and on with your regularly scheduled programming. If you've been watching my channel since the beginning, you'd know that my first major product I took on was a 3-part, 40-minute deep dive into the motives of Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII Remake. That was the project that got me to start making videos on this platform. This, in part, was due to the sheer confusion brought about by the ending of FF7 Remake. That video was my attempt to make sense of what was going on during chapters 17 and 18, but I cut it off there. There was a lot more for me to talk about, namely where I think the story is going next. What exactly is the unknown journey the party is going on? What's going to come next in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2? I figured the best way for me to start this prediction of sorts is to describe what I believe the next game will begin with. I believe that the game will fade into Cloud, Sephiroth, and a bunch of Shinra troops in the back of a truck on their way to Nibelheim. The best way to start the game is with Cloud's Nibelheim flashback, or his version of the incident, what he tells to the rest of the party in the nearest village to Midgar, Calm. Gameplay-wise, will make a great introduction to the combat system, as in the original game. Cloud is a measly level 1, but he's fighting alongside Sephiroth, who would be a great teacher for both the player and Cloud. And for players of the first installment, I'll get to the story right on track with the most important plot development from the get-go, and the game should allow you to play as Sephiroth, which will be incredible for everyone. When Cloud finishes account of Nibelheim 5 years ago, the party will comment on the absurdity that he doesn't remember how he got out of there alive, and what happened to him during the last 5 years. During all this, a certain ninja from Wutai will steal all the party's materia, setting the player back to square one in terms of power scaling. Since it is the beginning of a new game, you don't want the player to be overpowered, at least on the first playthrough. It's a tactic used in, say, the Metroid Prime games, where during the prologue, Samus will have a lot of her suit upgrades, but lose it and will be sent back to square one, only to make her way back to that throughout the game. The party will leave Calm, and instead of having 3 party members go to the Chocobo farm, I believe that the entire party should travel with you. And during combat, to make up for all the unused materia in the first game, it would be best for the devs to use a Final Fantasy X type system, allowing you to use 1 ATB slot to change a party member once during combat. For example, you can have your normal 3 party members, let's say Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith, but you need enemy skill or steel during a combat situation, but none of them have that materia equipped. But that materia is on Red 13, so you can use a single ATB slot to swap Aerith to Red 13 to use that materia. And on the topic of materia, I believe that certain materia from Final Fantasy VII Remake should just be abilities innate with the weapon skill trees, like assess, counter, and parry. This will open up a lot more materia slots per party member, and more customization, as those abilities should just kind of always be there. There really shouldn't be a need to have it specifically for materia. And one of my favorite things with the original materia system in Final Fantasy VII was that there really weren't designated classes for each character, with the exception of Aerith as the party healer and the best magic user. With this game, the option to give any party member any class you thought would best suit them would bring it much more closer to the original game than in Remake, since that system is very bare bones in comparison, which makes sense for story reasons, since they're not going to find super powerful materia like Comet and Destruct on their first step of their adventure. I just hope that Square Enix gives more options when it comes to materia loadouts and much more customization, but I feel that's kind of inevitable. As I discussed in my massive Final Fantasy VII Remake video discussing the plan of Sephiroth, I came to a conclusion, and one I don't believe I articulated well. With Sephiroth luring the planet to kill Fate, the part of the planet that was meant to keep the events of the game on track with the original game, the storytellers are freeing themselves from the chains that they put on themselves by remaking Final Fantasy VII, one of the most important games to a lot of people. So, by giving themselves creative liberty, they aren't remaking the original, they are instead leaving it as it is, as an important piece of art, and now they can say something new with the framework of the story, with the characters. I don't think they're going to deviate too far from the original story. The party is still going to go to the Mithril Mines after finding an impaled Midgar Zolom. They're still going to go to Cosmo Canyon and talk to Bugenhagen, But what is going to change is the context of these events, as Sephiroth meddling with timeline is going to create differences. What you talk about with Bugenhagen is probably going to be much different than that in the original game. When it comes to discussion about what's in store for the party on their unknown journey, we know that the storytellers are set on making this a multiple part journey, the first of which was exclusively Midgar. So the question is begging to be asked, where is part 2 going to end? And there are 2 spots for part 2 to end, and whichever one it is depends on how the storytellers are going to pace the following parts. If part 2 is going to take its time, I believe the game will cover the events up to when the party goes to Nibelheim and meets Vincent Valentine, who, given the expansion of his character in the compilation material like Before Crisis, Advent Children, and most significantly Dirge of Cerberus, is going to be a very important figure, with immense power lurking beneath him. If this is how part 2 is going to end, it'll cover the Calm flashback, the Mithril Mine, Junin and the cargo ship, as well as Casa del Sol through the Gold Saucer, Corel, Gaganga, Cosmo Canyon, and end in Nibelheim. I feel like this is more likely given how expansive part 1 was, only covering Midgar. But if the storytellers are going to zoom right through the story and focus on the major beats of the original tale, part 2 could end at the Forgotten Capital. This would add Rocket Town, the second trip to the Golden Saucer, the Temple of the Ancients, Bone Village, and end with Aerith's death. I'm definitely leaning towards believing they're going to do the former. One of the most impactful moments of the original game, at least in my opinion, was returning to Nibelheim, and not seeing the charred ruins from Sephiroth's rampage 5 years prior, but instead to see it all standing with new people occupying the homes Tifa and Cloud grew up in, not even acknowledge the events that had transpired. That would be a great narrative way to end part 2, to begin with the Nibelheim flashback and how it was eviscerated by Sephiroth, and then to end with seeing Nibelheim as if that had never even happened. If they are going to do this, I feel like the only new playable party members would be Yuffie and Red 13, with Vincent Valentine being the Red 13 of part 2, he was only in the last few chapters of the game, so he was there, but he wasn't playable, only AI controlled. It just makes sense given that if they were to go through with this, Vincent Valentine would be introduced very late into the game. Beyond all of this, I have no idea what's going to happen in part 2 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, that this journey is truly unknown to all. Even though Square Enix hasn't released anything for part 2 as of the day I'm recording this, Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, or whatever they call it, is my most anticipated game right now, and I will be eagerly waiting for its release.